And thank you. And in this training, if you could all mute yourselves. In this training, you'll get a brief overview of what Azure is. We will cover Azure Active Directory and all the other components of Azure. Yep. So this training presented by myself, which is Clint, Tejas, and Manu. So when you all think about Azure, what comes to mind? Apur?
Azure is a cloud-based. What do you say? Azure. Mm, it is a cloud-based, and all the activities which are done inside it, or all the accounts which are created, are cloud-based. So we can access them from anywhere. Uh, yeah, that's what I know about it little bit.
It's you could say Azure. It's a cloud platform, right? In a cloud platform, you can have many different services that are offered to you. You could have Azure Active Directory, which is your services like your identity management. You could have infrastructure as a service, maybe your networks. Then you have virtual machines, things like that. So many different services are Azure are offered within one platform, which is Azure. Yep. So in this Azure training, we'll talk about different things, but predominantly what Azure is, it's Microsoft's cloud, a public cloud computing platform. You will get things like compute, analytics, storage, networking. You get everything possible, but this would be in the cloud. Yeah. In this particular training, we would talk about Azure Active Directory, the first one that you see at the left. Then in subsequent trainings, we'll learn about Azure subscription resources, resource groups. The one after that, we'll talk about security groups, service principles, app registration, so on and so forth. Your By the end of this training, you'll get a brief overview of what Azure is and what Azure can offer. Yep. Now, if we look at where to access Azure, right? So first thing you can do is you can sign up for free a subscription. You can sign up for a trial O365 tenant. Every Office 365 tenant comes with Azure built in, so you can access Azure once you sign up for a free subscription. You will get, I guess it is 25 days or 30 days of free usage, where you can access all the Office 365 cloud platform, and you can also access Azure. Where can I access Azure? Let's have a quick look at what Azure is in a more live environment. So if I look at this, this is the URL. You would enter portal.azure.com to come to this particular interface. Over here, you would get a dashboard. This is a dashboard with all the services that are there to offer. If I look at the services, it'll be hard for you to count the number of services that Azure offers, right? So you can scroll down to this entire thing. I don't know if you really want to go through each one of these services right now, but you could go to this particular URL and view all those services. Yeah. So that will be one of your assignments, to have a look at all the different services that Azure has to offer. Now,
Okay.
we're not going to dive into each one of those services. The first service we'll look at is Azure Active Directory. Now, Azure Active Directory, you can think of it as the backbone of communication or backbone of cloud IAM systems. So this is what manages all your identities. If you rewind time, go back in time, maybe quite a few years, everything was on premises, right? So if you were using multiple computers in a workplace, you would sit down on one computer, you would have a username password. The next computer, you would have another username password. Then one after that, you would have another username password. So you had a different identity on each system, right? Which is very hard for companies to manage, is very hard for you to remember as well. You cannot remember different usernames and passwords on different computers. It's almost impossible. Yep. So that is when Active Directory was introduced. Active Directory, it's a directory or cataloging system where you have one username and password, and using that one username and password, you can log into multiple different machines, right? So that made life easier for a lot of companies, and thus users could log in to multiple machines on many different floors, many even different departments, using their username and password, one username and password. For administrators, it was easier for me to grant permissions as well, because this way I could grant one username and password access to different resources from one central location. For example, if I want to give Tejas access to systems on the second floor, I could only give him access to systems on the second floor, which would be in a particular department. So if Tejas is a part of the IT department, he would get access to all computers. However, if Tejas is a part of finance department, he would get access to only finance resources. Yeah. So it made life easier for users, end users, and administrators alike. That was Active Directory. Now, if you take this Active Directory and move it to the cloud, it becomes Azure Active Directory. So Active Directory is for users or management of resources on premises or on your premise. And if you take everything to the cloud, it becomes Azure Active Directory. To connect the two, you would have AAD Connect or Azure Active Directory Connect. Using that tool, you can synchronize resources or objects. Actually, you can synchronize objects from on-premises to online. There are a few that replicate from online to on-premises, but predominantly Azure AD Connect is used to synchronize your objects from on-premises to online. So we would think of Azure Active Directory as Microsoft's enterprise cloud-based identity and access management system. So using Azure Active Directory, you can manage your resources, your identities, and access to resources. Yep. And this slide is what we already covered, but it gives you a written down version of what we just discussed. It talks about what Azure Active Directory is. It is the backbone of Office of the O365 system. It, yes, can sync your objects from on-premises to online. A few can sync the other way around. And it is Azure Active Directory is simply your online extension of your Windows or on-premises Active Directory. Yep. Some differences between your on-prem AD and Azure Active Directory are as follows. So the way you communicate, right? You can use REST APIs for communication. If it is Azure Active Directory, if it is on-prem, you use LDAP, Lightweight Active Directory Protocol, to communicate. For authentication, which is proving your identity, you would use cloud-based protocols if it is Azure AD, and if it is on-prem, you use either Kerberos or NTLM. For networks, you would have a flat structure of users and groups if it's Azure AD. If it is your on-premises, you use things like OUs, which is organization units. You would use domains and forests. For example, you can organize users and groups if it is online, but in on-premises, you would have a proper structure where you could put them in different domains. You can have multiple domains, you can have multiple forests, and you can have a trust between forests. Your entitlement management, here it is in the cloud, it is admins organize users and users into groups. In on-premises, admins or data owners assign users to groups. Yeah. So one is into groups, one is in two groups. For device management, you have MDM, mobile device management, and on-prem does not have any MDM. For desktops, like your Windows PCs and stuff like that, you can use Intune. And for on-premises, you would use group policies, GPOs. Yep. For servers, it's it uses domain services to manage servers. In on-premises, you use GPOs to manage servers. So these are all group policies when it comes to on-premises. In online, you have multiple different resources like Intune, MDM, domain services, things like that. Yeah. Now, if you're talking about Azure Active Directory, it is just not your on-premises. You can have any third-party applications as well that use this IAM system. You can have one central location to manage everything. For example, your your HR applications, maybe your Oracle applications, your on-prem Active Directory, on-prem applications that you create. You can get your cloud-hosted apps and your SaaS apps like Salesforce, O365, so on and so forth. Yeah. So Azure Active Directory will provide you one central location to manage all your resources using that same username and password that we talked about earlier. Thus, Azure Active Directory is a very good or robust or resilient platform for you to use when it comes to IAM systems. Then it delivers one single sign-on experience for legacy applications as well. So when you sign in, you have an option with Azure Active Directory to have conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are you can, if someone is from a certain area, you can grant them access to resources, or if someone has a particular attribute stamped, you can grant them access to B resources. For example, if Tejas is in the IT department, I can grant him access to all resources. But if Manu is a head of finance, I can grant him access to just finance resources. And if more people join Manu's team, I can just add an attribute to them, which is finance department equals finance. And my conditional access policy will grant access to that new person to resources that are finance oriented, right? So you can manage all that in Azure Active Directory. You can use things like maybe external users when they sign in. I want them to have multi-factor authentication enabled. If users from maybe Alaska login or Nigeria login, right, I can block access to certain resources. So you can do all that when it comes to Azure Active Directory. You can take care of all your cloud applications, your on-prem applications, and your third-party applications, third-party to Microsoft. So third-party applications like Citrix and Zscaler, so on, so forth. So with this, it summarizes what Azure Active Directory is. We will have a brief look at what Azure Active Directory is in the cloud. So if I go here, in this blade, this is your this is Azure. You can click over here for the recent services used, or to the left, click on Azure Active Directory. In Azure Active Directory, I can see that I have users, groups, external identities, roles. These are your admin roles like global admin, so on and so forth. Admin units, you have devices, enterprise applications, app registration. So Manu and Tejas will eventually talk about enterprise applications and app registrations when they talk about service principals. It would also do identity and governance. Let's just look at some of the services that could be offered. One, you've already seen users and groups. This will give me all the users in my organization. Yep. You can do a lot of things over here. and we go to groups. This will give me all my groups in my organization. And then the roles and administrators, this will give me all the roles. I guess there are about 80 some roles that are available for you to assign to users. Yep. Then you can do things like check who's signing into my portal. And I guess since this is my test portal, it would only be me. But yeah, only me. And you can get logs like sign-in logs, audit logs, provisioning logs, where objects are provisioned, so on and so forth. So you can play around with Azure Active Directory over here and see what Azure Active Directory has to offer. I did mention sometime during this session about AAD Connect, Azure AD Connect. Now, when you use this tool, you can synchronize objects from on-premises Active Directory to online Azure Active Directory, right? And those objects would show up as synced. So if I come to users over here, synced with Active Directory would be yes. Yep. So with that, I conclude this session for today. Yep. And the next session, we'll talk about subscriptions, resources, and resource groups.